The man hired to cook for 6 children, and their mother stood in the center of chaos, flour dusting his graying hair like early snow. 4-year-old Augustus wrapped around his leg like a desperate vine. 15-year-old Tobias gripped a shotgun with white knuckles. The twins had overturned chairs into a fortress of defiance. Outside, fists hammered the kitchen door. Angry voices demanded justice, demanded removal, demanded the natural order restored. Magnolia Wyndham positioned herself between her children and the world that wanted to tear them apart. Tears carved tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "This man became the father they wished for," she declared to the door that shuddered under each blow. "I'll die before I let you destroy this family." The pounding stopped. In the silence, Cookie's cast-iron skillet reflected lamplight. His sourdough starter sat patient in its jar, waiting for tomorrow's bread. 3 months earlier, none of this existed. The newspaper advertisement had been simple, desperate. Cook wanted for 6 children and 1 woman. Remote ranch. Steady pay. No questions about the past. Magnolia had written those words with a hand that shook from more than cold. 6 months since William died from the rattlesnake bite. 6 months of watching everything crumble. Tobias stole eggs from neighboring coops. The anger in him burned hotter each day, fed by guilt he wouldn't name. The twins, Clementine and Cordelia, had been banned from the schoolhouse after filling the teacher's desk with grasshoppers. Ezekiel ran poker games behind the barn, his 10-year-old hands dealing cards with disturbing skill. Persephone hadn't spoken since the funeral, 8 years old and silent as stone. Augustus woke screaming every night, reaching for a father who would never answer. The ranch bled money they didn't have. Cattle died. Fences fell. The roof leaked promises it couldn't keep. Neighbors whispered their solutions. Send the children east to relatives who remembered them only at Christmas. Sell the land. Start over somewhere else as someone else. Magnolia folded the whispers into the fire and wrote her advertisement instead. Jeremiah Blackstone arrived on a Tuesday when the wind carried dust devils across the yard like dancing ghosts. He rode a horse that had seen better decades and carried possessions that fit in a single bedroll. A cast-iron skillet hung from his saddle. A jar cradled in his arm held something precious and alive. "Cookie," he said when she asked his name. Just Cookie. His hands told stories his mouth wouldn't, scars across the knuckles, calluses from more than cooking. When thunder rolled overhead, he flinched like a man who'd heard too many guns. The children tested him immediately. Tobias squared his shoulders and declared their independence from any man's authority, especially his. The words he used carried the poison the town had taught him about men with dark skin and patient eyes. The twins salted his coffee while he unpacked, peppered his flour while he surveyed the kitchen. They waited for the explosion, the curses, the justice that never came. Cookie tasted the coffee without complaint, sifted the flour without comment, started over with the quiet persistence of water wearing stone. Ezekiel tried to win his horse in a card game, laid out an elaborate trap with marked cards and weighted dice. Cookie played along until the boy's confidence peaked, then revealed he'd been tracking every cheat from the first deal. "Math don't lie," Cookie said, reorganizing the cards with professional efficiency. "Neither should you." Persephone watched from doorways and corners. Her eyes held accusation for every adult who'd promised permanence and delivered loss instead. She tested him with silence, the cruelest weapon an 8-year-old possessed. Augustus simply hid. Under tables, behind flour sacks, inside his own terror that another father-shaped hole might open without warning. Cookie's first victory came through pancakes shaped like smiling faces. Augustus peeked from beneath the table as golden rounds sizzled in the cast-iron pan. 2 blueberry eyes. A bacon strip mouth curved upward. The giggle that escaped was rusty from disuse. Persephone emerged when bread filled the kitchen with memories of their grandmother's house, yeast and flour and something indefinable that meant safety. She didn't speak, but she stayed. The twins found their pranks met with curious appreciation rather than anger. Cookie examined their handiwork like an art critic studying masterpieces. Their elaborate traps became lessons in engineering. Their mischief found new channels. Tobias proved the hardest fortress to breach. His anger had roots deeper than grief, twisted through guilt that ate him from inside. He'd been supposed to check the snake-prone areas that morning, supposed to keep his father safe. Cookie didn't push, didn't demand, simply existed in the same space, reliable as sunrise, patient as growing seasons. The breakthrough came in town when Tobias heard the words that followed Cookie like shadows. Words about his place, his kind, his right to exist in their world. The boy's fist spoke before his mind could interfere. Cookie pulled him off the other man with gentle strength. No lectures about violence. No shame about the defense. Just steady hands that dusted off his shirt and walked him home. That night, Tobias appeared in the kitchen where Cookie prepared tomorrow's bread. The sourdough starter sat between them like a living thing. "Gertrude," Cookie said, introducing the jar. "She's been with me since the war, needs feeding every day, can't miss one or she dies." He pushed the jar across the table, placed responsibility in young hands that had known only how to destroy. "She's yours now. Family depends on you keeping her alive." Tobias accepted the weight, the trust, the chance to nurture instead of rage. Cookie watched the boy cradle the jar and realized something dangerous. These children weren't just his responsibility. They were becoming his healing. Tobias fed Gertrude each morning with the reverence of a priest tending altar candles. The sourdough starter bubbled and grew under his careful attention. Cookie watched from the corner of his eye, measuring flour and hope in equal portions. The boy's anger hadn't disappeared. It had found purpose instead. Direction instead of destruction. Cookie didn't just cook. He rebuilt souls one lesson at a time. The twins discovered their mischief could create beauty. Cookie handed them pastry bags filled with frosting, pointed at plain cake rounds, and watched chaos become art. Clementine crafted elaborate roses from sugar and butter. Cordelia sculpted tiny birds that seemed ready to take flight. The church social that month featured their masterpiece. A three-tiered wedding cake that drew gasps from women who dismissed the girls as hopeless. The preacher's wife ordered 2 more for upcoming celebrations. Pride replaced rebellion in their eyes. Ezekiel's mathematical mind found new problems to solve. Cookie set him loose on inventory sheets and recipe calculations. The boy who'd counted cards now counted supplies. His sharp intelligence channeled toward keeping the family fed instead of fleecing neighbors. "We need 30 pounds of flour for winter," Ezekiel announced one evening, numbers dancing across his slate. 47 jars for preserving, 22 chickens if we want eggs through January." Cookie nodded approval. The boy glowed brighter than lamplight. Persephone's silence began to crack. Cookie discovered her weakness for flavors, for the way food could tell stories without words. He'd hand her spoons of sauce, watch her face change with each taste. "Sweet," she whispered one afternoon, the first word in months falling from her lips soft as flour dust. "But needs salt." He added the salt. She smiled. Augustus became his shadow, tiny hands eager to help with every task. Cookie fashioned a step stool from scrap wood, carved the boy's initials into the side. Suddenly, Augustus could reach the counter, could stir pots, could be useful instead of underfoot. "Assistant cook," Cookie declared, and the title transformed a frightened child into a proud helper. The kitchen became their classroom, the cast-iron skillet their altar, every meal a lesson in patience, precision, and the kind of love that showed up daily without fanfare. Magnolia watched the transformation from doorways and dinner tables. Her children laughed again, spoke without anger, helped without being asked. The house that had echoed with chaos now hummed with purpose. She began asking Cookie's opinion on ranch decisions. Should they sell the old bull, plant oats in the south field? His answers carried wisdom earned through hard seasons and harder choices. Their evening planning sessions stretched longer. Cookie found excuses to linger after the children slept. Magnolia discovered reasons to keep him talking about tomorrow's meals. next week's chores, anything that meant he wouldn't retreat to the bunkhouse just yet. Neither acknowledged what grew between them. Neither named the way their hands brushed when passing papers, the way silence settled comfortable as worn quilts. The town noticed the changes. Mrs. Patterson commented on how well-behaved the Wyndham children had become at Sunday service. The schoolteacher welcomed the twins back with cautious optimism. Even the postmaster nodded approval when Tobias delivered mail without incident. But not everyone appreciated the transformation. Cornelius Blackwood owned the largest spread in 3 counties and water rights that made him richer than most territorial governors. He'd been circling the Wyndham Ranch since William's death, waiting for desperation to drive down the price. The family's newfound stability threatened his timeline. He began his campaign with whispered observations, inappropriate arrangements, unnatural situations, the kind of poison that spread through small communities faster than prairie fire. Cookie heard the whispers when he rode to town for supplies, felt the weight of stares that dissected his every movement. Some faces showed curiosity, others carried harder judgments. He kept his head down, finished his business, rode home to the only place that felt safe. The first anonymous note appeared nailed to the barn door, crude letters that spelled cruder threats. Cookie tore it down before the children could see, fed the paper to the kitchen fire. The second note found the chicken coop. The third, tied to the gate. Cookie said nothing, but Magnolia noticed how he checked the horizon more often, how his shoulders carried new tension. The storm came on a Tuesday night when wind rattled the windows and thunder rolled across the sky in endless waves. Cookie helped settle the children, told them stories about brave soldiers and patient horses until sleep claimed them one by one. But the thunder wouldn't stop. Each rumble became cannon fire in his memory. Each flash of lightning illuminated faces of men who died under his command. The kitchen became a battlefield. The cast-iron skillet transformed into army mess gear. The familiar walls dissolved into endless plains where death waited behind every ridge. Cookie's breathing came short and sharp. His hands shook as memories crashed over him in waves. Sarah's face. Little Samuel reaching for his father before the fever took him. The cholera that had swept through the garrison while Cookie rode patrol, powerless to protect what mattered most. He'd sworn never to love again, never to risk that kind of loss, never to fail another family when they needed him most. Augustus found him crying at the kitchen table, tears falling silent as rain. The 4-year-old didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations, simply climbed into Cookie's lap and settled against his chest, small arms offering comfort that words couldn't match. They sat together while the storm passed, while Cookie's breathing steadied, while the past loosened its grip enough to let the present return. "You're sad about your other family," Augustus said finally, his voice soft with sleep and understanding. Cookie nodded against the boy's hair. "They'd want you to be happy with us," Augustus continued with the wisdom children sometimes possess. "My daddy would want that too." The words broke something inside Cookie's chest, broke it open instead of apart, let light into spaces that had been dark too long. The next morning, Tobias appeared early to tend Gertrude, found Cookie already at work, kneading tomorrow's bread with steady hands. "You staying?" the boy asked without looking up from the sourdough starter. Cookie measured his words careful as flour. "If you'll have me." "We'll have you," Tobias said, simple as breathing, sure as sunrise. The family bond shifted that day, became mutual instead of one-sided. Cookie wasn't just healing them anymore. They were healing him, one breakfast at a time, one story at a time, one moment of trust that said family wasn't blood. Family was choice. But in town, Blackwood's whispers grew louder. His patience grew thinner. His plans grew darker. The happiness blooming in the Wyndham kitchen made them a target. Love, it seemed, was the most dangerous thing they could cultivate. And harvest time was coming. Spring brought wildflowers and the kind of happiness that made Magnolia forget how close they'd come to losing everything. The ranch hummed with purpose. The children bloomed under Cookie's steady attention. Tobias worked beside Cookie in the fields, his movements echoing the older man's patient rhythm. No more stolen eggs or midnight raids on neighbors' property. The boy who'd been drowning in anger now floated on responsibility. Clementine and Cordelia transformed the kitchen into an art studio each afternoon. Sugar sculptures lined the windowsills. Frosting roses bloomed across practice cakes. Their reputation spread through the territory. Orders arrived weekly for wedding cakes and birthday confections. Ezekiel managed the ranch books with mathematical precision that impressed visiting cattle buyers. Numbers that had once confused Magnolia now marched in orderly columns under his careful hand. The boy who cheated at cards now dealt in honest figures. Persephone read aloud each evening, her voice growing stronger with every story. She'd found words again, found the courage to shape thoughts into sounds that mattered. Augustus curled beside her, soaking up fairy tales and adventure stories with equal hunger. The little boy helped Cookie every morning now, his small hands learning to knead dough and measure spices. His nightmares had faded. His laughter filled empty spaces that grief had carved. Cookie attended their school plays and church services, sat in back pews where his presence drew stares but no longer seemed to matter. The children beamed when they spotted him in the congregation, their faces bright with pride. Family. The word had weight now, substance, meaning that went deeper than blood, but happiness made them visible. Success made them targets. Blackwood's whispers grew into conversations. Conversations became meetings. Meetings became plans. The businessman owned half the territorial legislature and most of the local merchants. His influence spread through the community in invisible threads, pulling opinions toward his vision of proper order. Improper arrangements, he called their household. Unnatural situations that threatened decent values. Christian children corrupted by heathen influence. The poison worked slowly at first. Sideways glances in church, hesitant service at the general store, comments that stopped when Magnolia approached but resumed in her wake. Cookie felt the change before she did. Recognized the signs from a dozen other towns, a dozen other jobs that had ended in midnight departures and burned bridges. The anonymous notes multiplied. Crude drawings accompanied cruder words. Threats that started vague grew specific. Deadlines appeared alongside demands. Cookie burned them all, fed the hatred to kitchen fires that transformed poison into ash. But the children noticed his increased vigilance, the way he positioned himself between them and the world. The first real blow came when the general store refused their business. No explanation offered, just a sudden inability to sell flour and sugar to the Wyndham family. Other merchants followed. The blacksmith discovered urgent work whenever Cookie approached. The twins were expelled from school again, not for misbehavior this time, but for the discomfort their presence created among other parents. Children repeated words they'd heard at dinner tables, words that cut deeper than any prank. Someone poisoned the cattle well. 20 head died before Cookie discovered the contamination. The loss bled money they couldn't spare, pushed them closer to the financial edge Blackwood had been sharpening. Magnolia confronted the pile of legal papers that arrived with the sheriff's reluctant delivery. Foreclosure notices, debt assessments, documents that swam before her eyes in meaningless patterns of legal language. She'd hidden her illiteracy for years behind William's capable management. Now the secret threatened everything she'd fought to protect. Cookie found her crying over the papers, her shoulders shaking with shame that cut him deeper than any anonymous threat. He knelt beside her chair, gathered the documents with gentle hands. "I can't read them," she whispered, the admission torn from some deep place where pride had dwelt. "Never learned proper. William handled everything." Cookie spread the papers across the kitchen table. His finger traced each line, translating legal complexity into simple truth. Blackwood had manufactured debts, invented assessments, created a paper trap designed to steal everything they'd built. "There's a way," Cookie said, his voice careful as measuring spoons. "Marriage would give me legal standing. Let me fight this proper." The proposal hung between them heavy as summer air before thunderstorms. Not born from passion but from desperate mathematics. Two broken people calculating their chances against a world that wanted them apart. Magnolia studied his face in lamplight, saw the man who'd rescued her children from themselves, who'd brought laughter back to kitchen corners and hope back to dinner conversations, who'd become father and friend and something deeper she hadn't dared name. "I love you," she said, the words simple as bread, necessary as breathing. "Have for months. But marriage makes us bigger targets." "We're already targets," Cookie replied. "Might as well be legal ones." The engagement announcement appeared in the territorial newspaper on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the storm hit. Blackwood organized meetings in church basements and private parlors, spoke of moral contamination and Christian duty, painted pictures of innocent children corrupted by unnatural influence. The community split along lines invisible until crisis made them stark. Some families stood quietly with the Wyndhams, remembering Cookie's kindness and the children's transformation. Others joined Blackwood's crusade with the fervor of righteous certainty. The family found themselves banned from businesses that had served them for years. Former friends crossed streets to avoid conversations. The isolation pressed against them like walls closing inward. A territorial judge arrived with papers declaring the household arrangement detrimental to the children's moral development. Official stamps that carried the weight of law and the poison of prejudice. Cookie packed his belongings that night, rolled his few possessions into the same bedroll that had carried his life from town to town, job to job, family to family. Gertrude the sourdough starter sat patient in her jar, ready for another journey. He'd lost one family to disease. He wouldn't let his presence destroy this one. The children discovered his preparations at dawn. Tobias stood in the doorway holding Gertrude, his face pale with understanding. The twins flanked him, their usual chatter replaced by stunned silence. Ezekiel clutched his accounting books against his chest. Persephone held Augustus's hand, both their eyes wide with familiar fear. "You can't leave," Tobias said, his voice cracking on words too heavy for 15-year-old shoulders. "We won't let you." Cookie knelt before them, these children who'd become his heart walking outside his body. "I'm trying to protect you." "We don't want protection," Clementine said, her chin lifted in defiance inherited from generations of stubborn women. "We want you." "You're our father now," Cordelia added, her sister's certainty echoing in her voice. "The one we chose." Augustus launched himself into Cookie's arms, small fingers gripping shirt fabric with desperate strength. "Don't go, Pa Cookie. Please don't go." The title broke something inside Cookie's chest, the same thing that had cracked during the thunderstorm, but wider now, deep enough to let in light that had been absent for years. These children had chosen him, had claimed him as their own despite every reason the world gave them to let him go, had decided family mattered more than safety, love mattered more than approval. The sound of approaching horses carried across the morning air. Many horses, many voices raised in anger and righteousness. Cookie looked at the faces surrounding him, his family, his choice, his chance to finally stand and fight instead of running toward another empty horizon. He set down his bedroll, picked up his cast-iron skillet instead. The kitchen became their fortress. Love became their weapon. Hope became their battle cry. The confrontation that would define them all was riding toward the front door. The horses stopped outside the kitchen door. Dust settled around hooves and boots like golden fog in morning light. Sheriff Morton's voice carried through the wood, official and reluctant. "Open up, Magnolia. Got papers need serving." Cookie stood in the center of his chosen battlefield, flour still dusting his sleeves from morning bread. Augustus wrapped around his leg like a vine seeking sunlight. Tobias gripped the shotgun with hands steady beyond his years. The twins crouched behind their overturned chair fortress, faces set with inherited stubbornness. Magnolia positioned herself between her family and the door that shuddered under impatient fists. Her tears had dried into something harder, something that wouldn't bend. "This man was hired to cook for my 6 children and me," she called through the wood. But he became the father they wished for. I'll die before you tear this family apart. The pounding stopped. Silence stretched thin as winter ice over deep water. Blackwood's voice cut through the quiet, sharp with righteousness and greed. That arrangement corrupts those children. Christian duty demands intervention. Open the door, Magnolia, Sheriff Morton added, his tone softer than the businessman's. Let's handle this civilized. Cookie knelt beside Augustus, gently loosening small fingers from his pants leg. The boy's face carried the same terror that had haunted his nights after his father's death. Fear that love meant loss. That attachment meant abandonment. You stay with me, Cookie whispered, lifting Augustus onto his hip. All of you stay with me. Magnolia's hand trembled on the door latch. The metal was cold as December wind, heavy as the choice that would define them all. She looked back at her children arranged around Cookie in defensive formation. Tobias stepped forward, his young face carved with determination that would have made his father proud. He taught me what a man really is, not through anger or force, but through choosing to love us every single day. Clementine emerged from behind her barricade, sugar dust still clinging to her apron from morning baking practice. He made us better people, not worse ones. Anyone with eyes can see that. Cordelia joined her twin, their synchronized defiance a mirror of synchronized mischief from months before. We were broken when he came. Now we're whole. Ezekiel clutched his account books, numbers that proved their family's worth in ledger lines and careful calculations. He didn't give up on me when I messed up the worst. Taught me to use my mind for building instead of cheating. Persephone's voice carried clear as church bells, each word chosen with the precision of someone who'd learned their value through loss. He helped me find my voice again when I thought it was gone forever. That's not corruption. That's healing. Augustus buried his face against Cookie's neck, his whisper meant for one ear but carrying to every heart in the room. He's my real daddy now. He chose us and we choose him back. Magnolia opened the door. Sheriff Morton stood on the threshold, hat in hands, his face showing the discomfort of a man caught between duty and decency. Behind him, Blackwood radiated satisfaction beside a crowd of townspeople, whose expressions ranged from righteous anger to uncertain doubt. But other faces appeared in the group. Mrs. Patterson from the church, her weathered hands twisted in her apron. The schoolteacher, Miss Henderson, her mouth set in a thin line of disapproval, aimed not at the family but at their accusers. Cornelius Blackwood, Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the morning air sharp as Cookie's best knife. You should be ashamed. These children have shown more Christian behavior since that man arrived than most adults show in a lifetime. Miss Henderson stepped forward, her teacher's authority making grown men shuffle like guilty students. I've watched Clementine and Cordelia transform from troublemakers to helpful young ladies, witnessed Tobias become a responsible young man, seen Augustus blossom from a frightened child into a confident boy. The evidence of his influence is written in their behavior, Mrs. Patterson added, her words carrying the weight of a woman who'd raised 7 children of her own. What kind of Christians condemn a man for loving orphaned children well? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Doubt crept across faces that had carried certainty moments before. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of Cookie's fresh bread from the kitchen window. Blackwood stepped forward, his voice rising to overcome the growing dissent. The territorial judge's order is clear. This arrangement violates moral standards. Sheriff Morton reached into his coat, withdrew official papers with territorial seals, but his expression carried something unexpected, something that made Blackwood's confident smile falter. About those papers, Cornelius, Morton said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for weeks. Funny thing about territorial judges, they keep records, send copies to the federal marshal's office. He held up additional documents, these bearing different seals, federal seals that carried more authority than local prejudice. Marshal Jenkins was real interested to learn about forged territorial orders, fake debt assessments, land fraud schemes designed to steal family ranches through manufactured legal troubles. The color drained from Blackwood's face faster than water through broken earth. His mouth opened and closed without sound, a man watching his carefully constructed lies crumble in public view. "Seems you've been running this game on several families," Morton continued, his deputy stepping forward with iron restraints. "Federal government takes a dim view of territorial fraud." The crowd shifted again, this time away from Blackwood rather than toward the Wyndham family. Justice had a way of clarifying moral positions, of separating righteous anger from manufactured outrage. Cookie watched the businessman's arrest with quiet satisfaction. Not the wild joy of revenge, but the steady contentment of seeing natural consequences finally catch up with planted seeds of hatred. 6 months later, the expanded kitchen table groaned under the weight of Sunday dinner. Cookie had built it larger to accommodate their growing chosen family, sturdy oak that could weather storms and time with equal grace. Tobias carved the roast with steady hands, his movements echoing Cookie's patient teachings. The twins arranged their latest cake creation at the table's center, a masterpiece of sugar roses and buttercream artistry. Ezekiel announced the week's earnings from their various enterprises, his mathematical precision ensuring their prosperity. Persephone read from a new book of poetry, her voice carrying stories into the warm air where they settled among the family like blessings. Augustus helped Cookie serve vegetables, his small hands steady with practiced competence. Magnolia wore a simple wedding ring that caught lamplight as she passed dishes around their circle. The ceremony had been quiet, attended by friends who understood that love came in many forms and family was built through choice rather than chance. Outside, the Montana sky stretched endless and blue, promising fair weather for the growing season ahead. Inside, the cast-iron skillet reflected the faces gathered around Cookie's table. He looked at each beloved face, these children who'd claimed him as their own despite every reason the world gave them to choose differently. They taught him that healing moved in both directions, that broken people could mend each other through daily acts of care and patience. The title that had started as employment had transformed into truth. He'd been hired to cook for 6 children and their mother, but through flour and laughter, through tears and triumph, through the simple act of showing up every day with steady love, he'd become the father they'd all wished for. Some families were born, others were built. The strongest were chosen, one meal at a time, one moment of trust at a time, one decision to stay when leaving would have been easier. Cookie reached for Gertrude, the sourdough starter that had traveled with him from job to job, town to town, family to family. Tomorrow he'd teach Augustus how to tend her properly, how to keep something alive through daily attention and care. The recipe for family, it turned out, wasn't so different from the recipe for bread. Simple ingredients, patient tending, and the faith that time would transform ordinary elements into something that could sustain life. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.